this job for 25 years now, so I've worked at the end of the line, offering my care to the deceased, obviously when no one else can. And what we were finding, when we were asking, when the first wave kicked off, we all got sent for face fit testing. So we all went down. There was a multitude of masks that we could try and fit. And the ones that we were fit, they would send us a supply down to our work. Now, when they'd send a supply down to the work, the boxes were all white. They were original FFP3 masks from 3M, but they had an orange expiry date on them. So I peeled back the orange expiry date, which was like 6 months in advance, and the sticker underneath was like 2 years old.
Oh,
so
God.
I peeled that sticker off, and the sticker underneath that, the masks actually ran out of date in 2016.
Right.
Now, these were giving us masks, obviously 4 years out of date, and relabelling them, saying that we were safe, saying that we must go in there and deal with COVID patients with these, obviously, 4 year out of date masks. Now, I understand that you've got people on ITU and all these other wards dealing with, face-to-face COVID patients, but we're doing autopsies, Nick. We're removing the organs from the body. We're transecting the lungs, mate. It's a lot more invasive than every other Joe, and it's four years out of date on the masks.
When your bosses told you about...
We were in a fortunate enough position that when we had the deceased coming down into our care, we had to check the laboratory results to make sure no one had COVID when they come in for a PCR. And what we were finding is everyone was admitted without COVID. They were catching it in the trust, Nick. It was coming from the wards. The people would come in with like a sore leg or whatever the ailment was that they present themselves to A&E with, and then they catch COVID in the trust. Then they come down to me as a death with COVID. And I found most of it was coming from inside the NHS. Now, I'd like you, if you could, to put to Matt Hancock, how many people presented to the NHS without a positive test? How many people then got a positive test whilst in hospital? And then how many of them people further went on to die because they got COVID whilst in hospital?
I'd love to have the opportunity to do that. Unfortunately, we haven't had Matt Hancock. He's not been doing the rounds for some time now. But, John, I found that the most gruelling, and the job that you do, sir, respect you because someone has to do it, but very, very tough. John, thank you for that. Please excuse me, I'm only moving on to get other people involved, but I have made a note as you were talking the FFP3 masks and just how out of date they were back to 2016. John, thank you. Lynn in Radlett. Lynn, what do you want to tell me? Good morning.
Oh, hello. Yes, yeah. I don't really blame Matt Hancock.
Right.
In my family, my husband was in a care home, and he died. Sadly, he died.
With COVID?
With COVID, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Right.
And what happened was that, quite a few weeks before, there was lockdown, we weren't allowed to visit. So they were very, very sort of quick on the ball. They wouldn't. They said no more visitors.
Right.
So I could only speak to him sort of like on the telephone.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
And then when I went to visit, looked through the window, they had their PPE on and everything.
Right. Do you mind my asking, how old was your husband?
He was 71.
Right. And how do you view the care that he was provided prior to you losing him and the government handling of it all, Lynn?
I felt that he was really cared for properly. They were really careful. As I say, my daughter, she worked in another care home, but they didn't shut the visiting down till good 3 or 4 weeks later.
When did you lose?
Sometimes I do wonder whether it was sort of like the care homes. Obviously, I'm not sort of slating them.
When did you lose your husband, Lynn?
In May.
May of this?
May the 3rd last year.
Oh, last year. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, not of course that makes it's still very, very raw. Perhaps not quite as raw. But Lynn, my condolences to you. Thank you, and really important here because you have been. Well, sadly, it was your late husband who's very much on the receiving end of the treatment, and thank you. I hope you have as good a weekend as you can. Thank you for sharing so much. It's 5 to 8 the time. Let's come back to the conversation. Then it leads us very much into the front line and the provision of vaccines so people don't endure what that woman's had to. So let's bring him to the conversation. Vaccines Minister is now known, Nadhim Zahawi, who joins me now. Good to have you on. What can you tell us about this letter from Humza Yousaf, who's talking about a shortage of the Pfizer jab? Good morning, Minister.
Good morning, Nick. Humza Yousaf, who is the Scottish Health Minister.
Matt Hancock's equivalent, effectively, yeah.
Matt Hancock's equivalent to Scotland. We've been delivering, obviously, vaccines for Scotland, for Wales, Northern Ireland, and I am absolutely confident, and I'll speak to Hamza on this, that we will be able to deliver the Pfizer vaccines that Scotland needs to be able to meet its targets for end of July as the United Kingdom target.
But it is going to be tight
July.
over the next few weeks then, Mr. Zahawi.
It will be. There's no doubt. Every time I've come on your show, Nick, I've said that the determinant factor in terms of vaccine in arms is supply. And supply remains finite, but it's stable. And Pfizer have done a great job in being consistent on their delivery schedule.
Why the shortage of Pfizer
that.
specifically, Minister?
Well, no, it's basically the doses that are scheduled to come in. They haven't had a problem at all. In fact, Pfizer have done remarkable things to increase their production, not just for us, but for the whole world, for Europe and the US as well. But it is tight. Every country has a delivery schedule. They're meeting the delivery schedules. I'm confident that Scotland will be able to meet the target of offering every adult at least one dose by the end of July, as we will in England as well. And I think we then move on, obviously, and keep going with the second dose into August, September, and hopefully we will be in a very strong position for the autumn in terms of a booster campaign as well.
But the reality, presumably, is that as the JCVI said that the under-40s should get Pfizer as opposed to others, that's increased the demand on Pfizer, so there's more Pfizer required that wasn't anticipated. Is that right?
So clearly, if the JCVI recommendation was to offer Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna to the under-40s, would have made a difference, because their recommendation is it is preferable to offer Pfizer or Moderna instead of AstraZeneca to under 40s.
So that's what's caused
that
it, isn't it? Because AstraZeneca drops out of the loop for under 40s, effectively.
But it hasn't impacted our targets. It hasn't
impacted.
Well, as I say, I'm confident that we will be able to offer Scotland the doses they need to be able to meet that end of July target of offering every adult the vaccine, because we've done the modelling and the numbers, and we're confident of our deployment programme. But I think, look, all the way through this, from back in December, we were the first country to regulate the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine and then begin vaccination on the 8th of December in all 4 nations together. We've coordinated really well, and I hope we can continue to coordinate and work together throughout this campaign. That is what has led to the incredible vaccine confidence in the UK. The ONS numbers this week were remarkable. 94%, I think, of all adults saying they're very likely or most likely or have already taken the vaccine.
Right. But it might confuse some of my listeners north of the border in Scotland when they wake up to a headline, Britain to give 100 million jabs to the rest of the world. Why should they go to Senegal when Scotland needs them?
Well, as I say, the announcement made by the Prime Minister today of 100 million doses that we will deliver for those countries in most need will not impact our own domestic deployment programme. Our priority will always remain to protect the British public.
But you haven't got enough in Scotland, Mr. Zahawi.
Well, look, as I said,
if I'm listening to this in Edinburgh and I see the Prime Minister grandstanding in Cornwall with 6 other world leaders, 100 million doses going from the United Kingdom, and I can't get Grandad vaccinated in Edinburgh, how am I meant to feel about the government, the British government?
Well, my message to you is that no doses that are required for Scotland, for Wales, for Northern Ireland, for England are being taken away by our announcement. We're doing only 5 million doses in the next couple of weeks. By the end of September, that 5 million will be delivered. 25 million by the end of the year. None of that has any impact on our own domestic deployment. That was one of the our modelling and our calculations were based on it absolutely protecting our domestic deployment in this phase, and of course in the booster campaign if we need it for the autumn.
Just a couple of final things, Mrs. Zahawi. When we heard from Matt Hancock yesterday that no one lost their lives as a result of a shortage of PPE, do you agree?
So I think Matt was basically sharing with the committee the information he has available to him, which is he has seen no evidence that people have lost their life through the shortage of PPE. Now,
no evidence,
he also
but
quoted,
do you believe that? When you recall, Mr. Zahawi, and you'll know better than I, that at the height of it, we were sending our very brave NHS staff in as if they were dealing with toxic asbestos. They had that kind of kit. It would speak to me that this is quite a virulent disease. So the idea a girl or a man is handling a patient with a bin bag, you're telling me they're not at risk?
No, what I'm telling you is if you look at the National Audit Office report,
Wow.
when they looked at the national system and they did their own survey of the national system, there was not a national shortage. But that doesn't disregard, and the NAO report says this as well, and I don't want your listeners to misunderstand me, that does not disregard what the NAO also said, that for individuals on the front line may have faced certain challenges and shortages in terms of getting their PPE. So I would take nothing away from the heroes on the front line who may have faced those shortages. We entered a pandemic where we could only produce 2% of our PPE in this country. We now produce 70% of our PPE in this country, and that is a massive leap. We could only do 2,000 tests when we entered this pandemic. We now regularly do, the last 7 days, we did over 6 million tests in the United Kingdom. So we will learn the lessons, of course. There's going to be a public inquiry which will look at all the evidence and will report back, as will the select committees as well.
Let me ask you this. For the newspaper, some newspapers, they say that Mr. Hancock is telling porkies or he's a liar. You don't recognise language such as that. I appreciate that. But can I say, do you believe he's been economical with the truth, Minister?
No, I don't. I think Matt has shared with the select committees all the information that is available to him. It is in an imperfect world that we live in. We know that. We entered this pandemic with some massive challenges. I've just talked about diagnostics, testing, 2,000 a day, now in millions a day. PPE, only 2% being manufactured in the UK, and the whole world, if you recall, was chasing PPE because of the pandemic really taking hold in many, many countries. So Matt Hancock, at every step of the way, has done the best to his abilities with the information available to him.
OK. Lastly, the phone goes at some point this weekend, and you can hear in the background people chomping down scones, a little boy gurgling with delight as he's building sandcastles, and Cornish sea shanties being played. And then you hear, the great Zahawi. What are we going to do on the 21st of June? What do I tell everybody on Monday? Nadhim Zahawi, what will your advice be to your boss, the Prime Minister, as to whether England stays on track for the route map on the 21st of June? Come on, the great Zahawi, yay or nay?
I would say this has been a hard-fought war against this virus, and let's not squander the hard-fought gains we've made. This virus hasn't gone away, Nick. You know that, right? This virus will attempt to survive. Last week, let me share with your listeners, right? Last week, cases increased by 63%. Now, the good news is vaccines are beginning to sever that link between cases, 63% rise, and hospitalisation. Hospitalisation only rose by 7.1%. And luckily, sadly for those families, deaths only rose by 1.9%. But, and here's the important thing, we know in places like Bolton and Blackburn, the 12,500 cases of the Delta variant, 75% of those people were not vaccinated with any dose. Some of them had one dose only. Really important that we continue to double dose and protect the whole country. And here's the thing. 4 weeks plus one was for a reason. On the 17th of May, we had a massive opening of the economy. People could meet indoors in a pub, in a restaurant, indoors in their homes with their friends and socialise. The virus will attempt to survive by mutating. The way it mutates is it needs to infect a population.
Right.
And we mustn't give it that excuse because we want the step 4 to be irreversible. We want the opening of the economy, getting our lives back to be irreversible.
It's a no,
So
isn't it,
I would
Mr.
say
Zahawi?
to the Prime Minister, let's not squander these hard-fought gains.
It's a no.
This virus is still there, but we have to be just very careful. We're almost there. Look, we're learning all the time. We've just talked about
How much longer
some of
do
the
you have? Another
challenges.
2 weeks, I imagine, is it, Mr. Zahawi?
Well, no, what I'm saying to you is we're flying the plane while we're building it, right? We're still learning about how this virus behaves all the time. Let's be careful. We've done so well with vaccinations, right?
Yeah.
Let's not squander that now. But we'll share the data on Monday, and the Prime Minister will do that, as he's done in each and every step that we've taken on the roadmap to recovery.
I think I know where I'm putting my tenner this weekend on regards to that decision. Thanks, as ever, Nadhim Zahawi, Vaccines Minister, appearing here on LBC, where we're late to the news 5 after 8.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the leaders of the world's 7 richest nations are expected to agree a plan to share 1 billion COVID vaccines with poorer countries. Boris Johnson has announced the UK will donate 100 million surplus doses over the next year. The G7 summit begins in Cornwall later, the leaders' first in-person meeting in 2 years. Our Westminster correspondent Ben Kentish is there.
The first session that gets underway today is on building back better from the COVID pandemic. That's a phrase that both Boris Johnson and Joe Biden have used in recent months, and they will be discussing with their fellow leaders exactly how they do that on an international global scale. But of course, more than COVID on the agenda too, there are also talks on gender equality, on foreign policy. That will mean how to tackle the threats posed by the likes of China and Russia, and on climate change, where the leaders will be addressed virtually by David Attenborough.
The UK's economy grew in April at the fastest rate since July last year. The Office for National Statistics says the rise of 2.3% in GDP was driven mainly by restaurants, pubs and shops as they reopened, but the economy still remains below pre-pandemic levels. 7 people have been arrested after a teenager was stabbed to death in South London. The victim was found injured in Streatham yesterday afternoon and later died in hospital. A new rail pass for domestic holidaymakers will go on sale later this year to try to boost the recovery of Britain's tourism sector. It'll enable people to save money on train travel and get discounts for attractions. Italy will take on Turkey in Rome tonight for the opening game of Euro 2020, which has been delayed by a year due to the pandemic. 15,000 fans will be at the Stadio Olimpico. After reaching the semi-finals of the World Cup in 2018, Gareth Southgate's England side hope to go one better this year. Forward Marcus Rashford says they're ready.
The environment's perfect for a team that's going to go and win things, so that's the first thing that Gareth had to put right, and he'd done it straight away the first time he come in. We all agreed we can be battling against each other on Saturday, but on Monday when we come together, we're now England and we're one basically.
Wales begin their campaign tomorrow against Switzerland in Baku, and Scotland's opener is against the Czech Republic at Hampden Park on Monday. In the city, the FTSE 100 will reopen at 70.80. In the city, the FTSE 100 is reopening at 70.88 after closing up 7 points yesterday. The pound buys $1.41 and €1.16. And the weather, cloudy for many to start, particularly in the west with some rain in places. Very warm with sunshine or brighter spells for eastern areas, a high of 25 degrees. From Global's newsroom, I'm Simon Conway.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Morning, 9 minutes after 8 on Friday the 11th of June. That extended interview of with the Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi, I've got to say, a little bit gloomy. June the 21st, I wouldn't put money on it. But prior to that, a week today, let's talk about the Euros. We've told you, of course, the football tournament kicks off. Now, I appreciate not all of you are going to be listening, have a huge interest in football. That's for the station down the road where they're obsessed with David Beckham's left foot. But let me just tell you, in a week's time, arguably one of the biggest games of football you could have in this country. It'll, I'm sure, be dubbed in papers such as The Sun and the Daily Mirror, the Battle of Britain. It will be England versus Scotland in a tournament. Now, those games were always testy or tasty enough as it was, even when they were just playing each other in friendlies, or what used to be known as the home internationals when I was growing up. Factor it into a Euro, and it's going to have an extra piquancy, and I sense the guys will go clattering into each other. But as if it's not going to be tense enough, it's going to start in a very different, it appears will start in a very different way. This because prior to the whistle actually sounding, the England players, as they have done, will take the knee. But not so, it would appear, the Scottish lads. We go back to March and the team manager, Steve Clarke.
The knee, when it was first proposed and first taken, was a really, really powerful symbol. It's maybe become a little bit diluted. There's been some high-profile cases recently. The racism, the abuse is still there. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable to anybody. And maybe just taking a stand as opposed to taking the knee. waking everybody up to the fact that if we go to sleep, it'll never go away. We have to keep confronting it and pushing forward and making sure racism of any form is not acceptable.
This is a tricky one. How should it be handled? Let's speak with Carly Osborne, who played football for Brentford and is head coach of Brentford Women, joins me now. First off, congratulations. I was so thrilled to see your team get into the Premiership, and I speak as the fan of a less than glamorous Premiership club, Leicester City, and I've been there 50 years. So welcome aboard. Great to have you, and I hope you have a great run in the Premiership. But Carly Osborne, would you take the knee prior to a game, and what would you say to the Scottish lads? Good morning.
Morning, Nick. It's great to be on. Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind words. In regards to taking the knee, me personally, I would take the knee. I think it's a symbol that, as we can all see and as we all know, clearly causes conversation and creates opportunity for people to be educated within that. Racism is something that black players and black people have suffered for many, many years. And it's something that we still suffer today. And I think, we've done and tried many different things. But I think for me, the symbol of taking the knee, like I said, creates a lot of opportunity for conversation and education.
Well, let me ask you this. So say you're in that England lineup next week. Are you taking the knee because you want to show unity with Raheem Sterling, Marcus Rashford? Are you taking the knee because you believe in BLM? What is driving you to do what you would do, Carly?
Okay, so on that, so I'm taking the knee because of the fight for racism and injustice. I think what's happened